The message arrived on every screen, every datapad, every communication device across the Velen homeworld simultaneously. Kira's hands trembled as she read the words that would change everything. The Galactic Council had voted. Her people, the Velens, were to be expelled from all protected trade routes. Their colonies would receive no aid. Their ships would be denied docking rights at every major station in civilized space. The reason was simple and damning. 3 Velen scientists had been caught selling weapons designs to a rogue faction. It didn't matter that those 3 had acted alone. It didn't matter that the Velen government had arrested them immediately and turned over all evidence. The council had decided that the entire species would pay the price. Kira stood in the central plaza of the capital city, watching the sky as if expecting something to change. Around her, millions of Velens stood in shocked silence. Their world was relatively young to the galactic stage, only 200 years since first contact. They had followed every rule, paid every fee, respected every protocol, and now, with one vote, they were pariahs. "What do we do?" her brother Talon asked beside her. His voice carried the same hollow quality everyone seemed to have now. "Our food supplies come from off-world. Our medicine, even the air recyclers in the underground cities need parts we can't manufacture ourselves." Kira had no answer. She worked as a diplomatic aide, had spent years learning the intricate dance of galactic politics. She knew the reality. Once the council made a decision like this, it was final. No species had ever been reinstated once expelled. The Velens would slowly starve, slowly suffocate, slowly die as their infrastructure crumbled without the supplies they needed. The other species of the galaxy would watch and do nothing. That was how it worked. The council's word was absolute. 3 days passed in chaos. The Velen government sent desperate pleas to every species they had ever traded with. Every message was returned unopened, or met with formal apologies. No one wanted to risk the council's wrath by helping a condemned species. Riots broke out in the cities. The military struggled to maintain order, while their own families faced the same grim future. Kira spent those days in the diplomatic offices, watching her superiors make call after call to no avail. On the 3rd night, she stayed late, unable to face going home to her small apartment, where she would just sit and wait for the end. She was alone in the darkened office when a new message arrived. It wasn't on the official channels. It bypassed every security protocol they had. The message simply appeared on her screen, text only, with an attachment. "We heard you need some help. We're not part of your council, so we don't have to follow their rules. If you want to talk, here's how to reach us. Humanity." Kira stared at the words. Humanity. She had heard of them, of course. Everyone had. They were the newcomers, the strange species that had appeared on the galactic scene only 50 years ago. They came from a distant arm of the galaxy that most civilized species considered too dangerous to explore. Their home system was surrounded by asteroid fields, rogue planets, and unstable stars. Yet somehow they had developed faster-than-light travel on their own and arrived in council space with a fleet of mismatched ships and an attitude that baffled everyone. Humans didn't follow the standard protocols. They didn't wait for council approval before exploring new systems. They traded with whoever they wanted, including species the council considered primitive or dangerous. They had been fined countless times, sanctioned, even threatened with expulsion themselves. But they kept coming back, kept pushing boundaries, kept ignoring rules they claimed made no sense. The council tolerated them because human technology was surprisingly advanced in certain areas. Their weapons were crude but effective. Their ships were tough. And most importantly, they controlled several key systems that held resources other species needed. It was easier to deal with humanity's constant rule-breaking than to go to war over it. Kira's fingers hovered over the keyboard. This could be a trap. It could be humans offering false hope just to see what would happen. Everything she had learned about diplomacy told her to report this to her superiors and wait for an official decision. but her superiors had spent 3 days accomplishing nothing. The official channels had led nowhere, and in a few weeks, maybe a month, people would start dying. She opened the attachment and followed the instructions. The communication channel that opened was unlike anything in Velen's systems. It was encrypted with methods she didn't recognize, routed through nodes that her equipment couldn't even identify. After a moment, a face appeared on her screen. Human, male, probably middle-aged by their standards, though it was hard to tell. He had dark skin, graying hair cut short, and eyes that seemed to be smiling even though his mouth was serious. "Evening," he said, "or morning. I'm never sure with alien day cycles. I'm David Chen, captain of the merchant vessel Lucky Strike. You must be pretty desperate to answer a random message from humans." Kira found her voice. "I'm Kira. I work for the Velen Diplomatic Corps. Are you authorized to speak for your government?" David laughed. "Our government? Which one? We've got about 200 countries back home, and they barely agree on anything. No, I'm not speaking for anybody but myself and my crew. But here's the thing about humans. We don't need authorization to help someone in trouble." "I don't understand," Kira said. "Look, I'll be straight with you. Word travels fast out here, and we heard about what the council did to your people. It's garbage. 3 people make a mistake, and millions pay for it? That's not justice. That's collective punishment, and most humans find that pretty disgusting." Kira felt something stir in her chest. Hope? She tried to push it down. "Even if you're willing to help, what can you do? You're one ship. We need food, medicine, replacement parts for critical systems. We need it continuously for millions of people, potentially for years until we can build our own production facilities." David's smile widened. "One ship? No. But I'm not the only human who heard about your situation. See, we've got this thing we do. We don't like bullies. We really don't like powerful people picking on those who can't fight back. And we have a very hard time following rules that we think are stupid." He leaned forward. "How many ships do you think humans have in this part of the galaxy?" "Intelligence estimates put it at maybe 200 vessels, Kira said. "Official vessels, sure. But humans are explorers, traders, wanderers. We go places we're not supposed to. We make deals the council doesn't approve. And we talk to each other." He tapped something off screen. "I put the word out about your situation 6 hours ago. Want to know how many captains have signed up to run supplies to your world?" Kira waited. 347 so far, and it's still growing. The number seemed impossible. "That's more ships than you're supposed to have in this entire sector." "Supposed to" being the key words, David said. "Look, here's what we're offering. Free transport of essential supplies. We'll coordinate with your government to figure out what you need most urgently. We'll bring it in. The council can't stop us because we're not members of their little club. They can fine us, sanction us, whatever. We've been dealing with that since we showed up." "But why?" Kira asked. "What do you gain from this?" David was quiet for a moment. "You ever heard what happened when humans first encountered the council?" Kira nodded. "You were offered a standard trade agreement and protection in exchange for following council law and paying the appropriate fees." "Right, and we said no. The council couldn't believe it. Every other species had jumped at the chance to join, but we read the fine print. We saw how the council worked. They keep everyone dependent on them. They control who trades with whom. They decide who gets punished and for what. And if you step out of line, they crush you." He shook his head. "Humans fought wars for thousands of years against systems just like that. We're not about to join one now just because it's in space." "So you're doing this to oppose the council?" "We're doing this because your people need help, and we can provide it. Everything else is just details." David glanced at something off screen again. "I'm sending you a list of items we can start shipping immediately. We'll need coordinates for delivery zones and someone to organize distribution on your end. Can you handle that?" Kira realized she was crying. She wiped at her eyes quickly. I need to inform my government. They need to approve this. Of course. But Kira, don't take too long. People are counting on you. He paused. And one more thing. Tell your people to relax. Humanity has you covered. Even when the galaxy is against you, you're not alone. The communication ended. Kira sat in the darkness, staring at the list that had appeared on her screen. Food, medicine, spare parts, fuel cells, raw materials. The list went on and on, each item marked with quantities available and estimated delivery times. At the bottom was a note. This is just the first wave. Tell us what else you need. She stood up and ran through the empty corridors to find someone, anyone who could make decisions. The night shift supervisor listened to her stumbling explanation with growing disbelief. You're telling me that hundreds of human ships are going to run a blockade that doesn't officially exist to bring us supplies they have no obligation to provide? Yes, Kira said. Why would they do that? Because they can, and because they think the council's decision was wrong. The supervisor stared at her. Then he picked up his communication device and started making calls. By morning, the entire Velen government was in emergency session. Kira stood before a council of ministers and military officials, repeating what David had told her. Many were skeptical. Some thought it was a trick. But the Minister of Resources, an elderly woman named Sarah, asked the only question that mattered. If this is real and we refuse, what happens? Silence filled the chamber. We die, Sarah answered her own question. Slowly but certainly. We have perhaps 40 days before critical systems start failing, 60 before food riots become uncontrollable. So I will ask the real question. Can we afford not to accept this offer? The vote was unanimous. Kira was put in charge of coordinating with the humans. She spent the next 2 days in constant communication with David and dozens of other human captains, organizing delivery schedules and distribution networks. The humans worked with an efficiency that surprised her. They didn't argue about routes or compensation. They didn't demand special treatment or tribute. They just asked what was needed and when, then figured out how to make it happen. On the 5th day after the Council's proclamation, the first human ships arrived. Kira stood in the control tower of the main spaceport, watching the sensors. One ship appeared on the edge of the system, then 5 more, then 20. Within an hour, the space around Velen was filled with human vessels of every size and design imaginable. Some were sleek and modern. Others looked like they had been assembled from spare parts. A few seemed held together by hope and stubbornness alone. But they all brought cargo. The ships landed or dropped containers from orbit. The containers held everything on Kira's lists and more. Food from a dozen human worlds, packaged to be safe for Velen biology. Medical supplies with instructions translated into Velen script. Replacement parts that somehow fit Velen systems despite the different tech standards. The humans had done their research. David's ship, Lucky Strike, landed at the main port. Kira went to meet him in person. He stepped down the cargo ramp wearing practical clothes and a smile that seemed to be his default expression. Behind him came his crew, 5 humans of various ages and appearances, all looking tired but satisfied. First delivery successful, David said, shaking Kira's hand in the human gesture of greeting. We've got more coming, a lot more, but I wanted to check in, see if there's anything we missed. You've done more than we had any right to ask, Kira said. I don't know how to thank you. Thank us by surviving, David said simply. That's all the payment we need. Over the next week, human ships came and went in a constant stream. They established a schedule, a network, a supply line that stretched across multiple systems. They brought not just supplies, but knowledge. Human engineers worked with Velen technicians to modify systems to be more self-sufficient. Human farmers shared techniques for growing food in harsh environments. Human doctors exchanged medical information, finding surprising compatibility between their biology and Velen physiology. The council noticed, of course. Messages arrived demanding that humanity cease their assistance immediately. The humans ignored them. The Council threatened sanctions. The humans shrugged. The Council sent warships to intercept human vessels. The humans simply went around them, using routes through dangerous space that no Council species would dare travel. Kira watched it all with growing amazement. These were people who had been part of galactic civilization for only 50 years, yet they moved through space like they owned it. They didn't ask permission. They didn't wait for approval. They saw a problem and fixed it. One night, she asked David about it. They were sitting in Lucky Strike's galley, reviewing supply manifests over terrible human coffee that Kira had developed a taste for. "How do you do it?" she asked. "How do you just ignore the Council? Ignore all the rules that everyone else follows?" David thought about it while sipping his coffee. "You know what humans are really good at? Surviving. We evolved on a death world. Weather that could kill you in minutes. Animals that saw us as food. Diseases that wiped out entire populations. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times with wars and environmental collapse. But we're still here." "Many species have faced challenges," Kira said. "Sure, but here's the thing about humans. We're pack animals. When someone in the pack is in trouble, everyone helps. It's instinct. It's culture. It's wired so deep into us that we can't ignore it, even when it would be smarter to." He looked at her directly. "The Council operates on fear and self-interest. Every species does what's best for themselves. But humans? We do what's right, even when it costs us." "That seems inefficient," Kira said. "Probably is," David agreed. "But it's who we are, and honestly, I wouldn't want it any other way." The supplies kept coming. The Velans began to hope. And the galaxy watched, confused and uncertain, as humanity once again proved that they played by their own rules. Human ships became a constant presence in Velan space. What had started as an emergency response evolved into something more permanent. The captains who had volunteered in the first wave kept coming back. They brought friends. They brought family members who had decided to join the effort. Young human pilots treated the supply runs like a rite of passage, a chance to prove themselves. Kira found herself becoming friends with many of them. There was Sarah, a pilot barely into her 20s, who flew a fighter-class ship modified to carry cargo. She had bright red hair and an infectious laugh. There was James, a grizzled veteran of something called the Saturn Wars, who never talked about his past, but always delivered on time. There was the crew of the Wandering Star, a family vessel operated by 3 generations who treated the Velans like extended relatives. Each human had their own reason for being there. Some were idealistic, wanting to fight injustice. Some were practical, seeing it as good training for dangerous routes. Some were rebels who enjoyed thumbing their noses at the Council. But all of them kept coming back. The Velan government tried to offer payment. The humans refused. They tried to offer trade agreements. The humans said they'd discuss it after the crisis was over. They tried to offer land for a permanent human presence on the planet. Some humans accepted, but only if they could pay fair market value. "We're not here to exploit you," David explained during one of their regular meetings. "We're here to help. There's a difference." 3 weeks after the first delivery, the Council sent an official delegation to the Velan homeworld. They arrived in a massive diplomatic vessel, flying Council colors, broadcasting on all frequencies that they came to negotiate. Ira was part of the Velan diplomatic team that met them. The Council representatives were from 3 species: a tall, thin Arxian who served as lead negotiator, a crystalline Thurine whose thoughts were translated through a device, and a stocky Bremen who seemed to serve as the muscle of the group despite being a diplomat. They met in the Grand Hall of the Velan government complex. The Arxian, whose name was Solicitor Ven, wasted no time on pleasantries. "The Council has reviewed the situation," Ven said. "We are prepared to offer a conditional reinstatement of trade privileges. The conditions are as follows: immediate cessation of all contact with human vessels, full disclosure of all agreements made with humans, and acceptance of a council oversight committee to ensure no further violations occur. The Velan Minister of State, a dignified older man named Torin, listened carefully. Then he said, "And if we refuse?" "Then the sanctions remain in place," Ven said, "and the council will be forced to take more severe measures against both the Velan people and any humans found operating in this sector." "You can't enforce that," Kira said. She knew she wasn't supposed to speak, but the words came out anyway. "You've been trying to stop the humans for 3 weeks. They just ignore you." Ven's large eyes focused on her. "The humans are violating dozens of council regulations. If they continue, we will be forced to respond with military action." "Go ahead," a new voice said from the back of the hall. Everyone turned. David Chen stood there, along with Sarah and James and a dozen other human captains. They must have landed during the meeting and walked in without being announced. "You weren't invited to this negotiation," Ven said coldly. "Good thing we don't need invitations," David said, walking down the center aisle. "But since you're threatening military action against my people, I figured I should be here." "This does not concern you." "Really? Because from where I'm standing, you're trying to force the Velans to cut us off or face your wrath. That concerns us quite a bit." David stopped in front of the council delegation. "Here's what you don't seem to understand. Humans don't respond well to threats. We really don't respond well to bullies, and we have a very long memory for people who try to use force to get their way." "Are you threatening the Galactic Council?" the Bremen delegate asked, stepping forward. "No," David said calmly. "I'm explaining reality. You want to stop us? Go ahead and try. You'll fail. You want to attack us? We'll defend ourselves. And we'll make sure every species in the galaxy knows that the Council uses military force against those who provide humanitarian aid." "What you're doing is not humanitarian aid," Ven said. "It's interference in Council affairs. The Velans aren't a Council member anymore. You expelled them. So technically, we're not interfering with anything." David smiled. "But let's cut through the political nonsense. You're here because we're making you look bad. Every ship we send, every life we save, it's a reminder that you sentenced an entire species to death for the actions of 3 individuals. That's what really bothers you." The Thurine's translator device crackled to life. "The Council maintains order. Order requires consequences for violations." "Order," Sarah spoke up. "Is that what you call it? Sounds like tyranny where we come from." "You've been part of galactic civilization for barely half a century," Ven said. "You understand nothing of how complex it is to maintain peace among thousands of species." "Maybe not," James said. His voice was gravelly, tired. "But we understand that when someone needs help, you help them. Everything else is just excuses." The meeting devolved into arguments. The council delegates made more threats. The humans made more promises to ignore those threats. The Velan officials sat quietly, watching 2 very different philosophies clash. Finally, Minister Torin stood. "I believe we've heard enough. The council has made its position clear. The humans have made their position clear. Now I will make ours clear." Everyone fell silent. "The Velan people were offered a choice today," Torin said. "We could accept the council's conditional reinstatement and abandon those who helped us when we were dying. Or we could maintain our relationship with humanity and face continued sanctions." He looked at each council delegate in turn. 3 weeks ago, we faced extinction. Our people were in panic. Our systems were failing. And the council, which we had served faithfully for 200 years, abandoned us. "You violated the law," Ven said. 3 people violated the law, Torin corrected. 3 people who we arrested, prosecuted, and punished according to our own justice system. That wasn't enough for the council. You wanted to punish millions for the crimes of 3, and when we were dying, you watched. He turned to David and the other humans. "These people asked for nothing. They came because it was right. They risked council sanctions and military action because strangers needed help. They've given us food, medicine, supplies, knowledge, and friendship. And now we're asked to betray them for the privilege of rejoining the organization that tried to kill us. Torin looked back at the council delegates. The answer is no. We refuse your conditions. If the humans are willing, we will continue our relationship with them. And if that means we remain outside the council's protection, so be it. We've learned who our real friends are. The council delegates left immediately, broadcasting threats on all frequencies. But Kira noticed they didn't actually do anything. No military ships appeared. No additional sanctions were imposed. The council seemed content to issue warnings and hope that would be enough. It wasn't. The human supply runs continued. If anything, they increased. More captains joined the effort. Human corporations, seeing an opportunity, began establishing trade agreements with the Velans for mutual benefit. Human scientists shared technology, not as charity, but as exchange between equals. And slowly, something unexpected happened. Other species began to notice. The first was the Keth, a small civilization in the neighboring sector. They had their own grievances with the council. They reached out to the Valens, asking about these humans who seemed to operate outside the established order. Then they reached out to humanity directly. Then came the Yorlin Collective and the Prex Federation and the solitary worlds of the Drin. One by one, species that had been marginalized or punished by the council found themselves in contact with humanity. And humanity, true to form, treated them as potential friends rather than assets to be exploited. A network began to form. Not an empire or a confederation, nothing so formal, just a loose association of species who traded freely, helped each other, and refused to bow to council authority. At the center of it all, often without even realizing it, were humans with their strange insistence on helping others and their absolute refusal to accept the way things had always been done. The council watched with growing alarm. They held emergency sessions. They debated responses, but they couldn't figure out how to deal with an enemy that didn't want to conquer anyone, didn't want power, and couldn't be bought or threatened into compliance. 6 months after the first human ship arrived in Valen's space, Kira stood once again in the control tower of the main spaceport. But this time, she wasn't watching desperately for supply ships. She was watching as the first Valen-manufactured cargo vessel prepared for its maiden voyage. The ship, named Remembrance, had been built with a combination of Valen engineering and human assistance. It would carry Valen goods to trade partners across the sector. The Valens were no longer dependent on outside aid. They were thriving. David stood beside her, along with many of the human captains who had become regular visitors to the planet. "You did it," Kira said. "You saved us." "You saved yourselves," David corrected. "We just gave you time and space to do it." "The council is still angry," Kira said. "They're calling this the human problem. They say you're destabilizing galactic order." David laughed. "Good. Their order needed destabilizing. They'll try to stop you eventually. They can't let this continue." "Let them try." David gestured at the sky, where human ships could be seen coming and going. "There are more of us out here than the council knows. We're exploring systems they've never bothered with. We're meeting species they've never contacted. And everywhere we go, we're making friends instead of subjects." "Is that humanity's goal?" Kira asked. "To build a new order to replace the council?" "No," David said seriously. "Humanity's goal is to live free and help others do the same. If that undermines the council, that's their problem, not ours." Sarah joined them, looking out at the busy spaceport. "You know what's really going to drive the council crazy? In about 5 years, when Velen ships are the ones running supplies to whatever species they've decided to punish next." Kira smiled. "Is that what you expect?" "I hope so," Sarah said. "That's how it works. Someone helps you. When you're back on your feet, you help someone else. Pretty soon you've got a whole network of people watching out for each other, instead of waiting for permission from some distant authority. The Remembrance lifted off smoothly, its engines bright against the afternoon sky. Kira watched it go, feeling pride and hope in equal measure. Her people had faced extinction and survived. They had been abandoned by those they trusted and found new friends. They had learned that the galaxy's rules weren't as absolute as everyone claimed. And they had learned it all from humans, those strange, stubborn, impossibly optimistic creatures who couldn't seem to follow orders if their lives depended on it. "Thank you," Kira said quietly. David put a hand on her shoulder. "That's what friends do. And hey, when humanity inevitably gets itself into trouble, we'll expect you to return the favor." "We will," Kira promised, without question. The next 2 years proved to be transformative, not just for the Velans, but for the entire sector of space they occupied. The network of species working outside Council authority grew steadily. Trade flourished. Technology advanced as different species shared knowledge freely, rather than hoarding it behind licensing fees and regulations. Conflicts still arose, but they were handled through direct negotiation rather than council mediation. And always humans were there, not as leaders or rulers, but as facilitators and friends. They introduced species to each other. They transported goods and people. They defended those who couldn't defend themselves. They asked for fair payment when appropriate and gave freely when needed. The Council, for its part, found itself increasingly irrelevant in this part of the galaxy. Species that had depended on them for millennia began to question whether that dependence was necessary. The Council's threats lost their power. Their sanctions became meaningless when there were alternative trade routes. Their authority crumbled when people realized they didn't need permission to talk to each other. Kira, who had been promoted to Minister of External Relations, found herself at the center of this new order that wasn't really an order at all. She met with representatives from dozens of species. She negotiated trade agreements. She helped establish protocols for dispute resolution that didn't require council oversight. And through it all, she worked closely with human representatives who seemed to genuinely enjoy the chaos of building something new. One day, she received an invitation that surprised her. The council wanted to meet, not to threaten or demand, but to discuss. They sent Solicitor Venn again, but this time he came alone and on a small, unremarkable vessel. They met in a simple conference room rather than the grand hall. Venn looked older than Kira remembered, more tired. "I'm not here in an official capacity," he said immediately. "This conversation is not being recorded or reported. I'm here because I need to understand something." "What's that?" Kira asked. "How did you do it? How did you go from a dying species to the center of a regional power block in 2 years?" "We didn't do it," Kira said. "Humanity did." "But why would they? What do they gain?" Kira thought about all the conversations she'd had with David and Sarah and James and countless other humans. She thought about their inexplicable insistence on helping strangers, their inability to ignore suffering even when it would be easier, their deep-seated belief that the universe should be fair, even though it never had been. "They gain friends," she said finally. "That's all they want, people they can trust, people who will help them when they need it. They're building a community instead of an empire." "That's not sustainable," Venn said. "Eventually, resources become scarce. Conflicts arise. People choose themselves over others. It's basic sociology." "Maybe for some species," Kira said, "but humans are different. They came from a world that tried to kill them constantly. They survived by working together, and they never forgot that lesson." She leaned forward. "You asked what they gain. Here's what they gain. They get to live in a galaxy where people help each other, where someone in trouble can call for aid and ships will come running, where children don't die because some distant bureaucrat decided their whole species should be punished for the crimes of a few." "You sound like one of them now," Venn said. "Good," Kira replied, "because that's the kind of galaxy I want to live in too." Venn was silent for a long moment. Then he said, The Council is afraid, not of human military might, though that's a concern. They're afraid of human ideas spreading. Species are starting to question the Council's authority. Some are talking about leaving entirely. Maybe they should, Kira said. If the Council falls, the galaxy descends into chaos. Or it evolves into something better. You're very optimistic for someone who faced extinction 2 years ago. I learned optimism from humans, Kira said with a smile. It's surprisingly infectious. Ven left without reaching any agreement or making any commitments. But Kira noticed that in the following months, Council sanctions became less frequent. Their demands became more reasonable. They started using mediation instead of punishment as a first response. It was subtle, but the change was real. Humans had done more than save the Velans. They had shown the entire galaxy that the old ways weren't the only ways. Kira's work expanded beyond anything she had imagined. She helped establish the Free Trade Collective, an organization of species committed to open commerce and mutual aid. She worked with human diplomats to create security agreements that didn't require surrendering sovereignty to some distant authority. She watched as the network grew from a handful of species to dozens, and she watched humans continue to be themselves, chaotic, helpful, stubborn, generous, and absolutely impossible to predict. One evening, 3 years after that first desperate message, Kira sat in a bar on a space station that humans had built in neutral territory. The station, called Haven, had become a hub for the Free Trade Collective. It was a wild place, full of species that had never interacted before humans brought them together. David found her at a corner table, looking out at the stars through the massive viewport. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. "Please," Kira said. He sat down with 2 drinks, something alcoholic from his homeworld. They clinked glasses in the human gesture of celebration. "What are we celebrating?" Kira asked. 3 years since Lucky Strike made its first supply run to Velen. Seemed worth marking. "It's been 3 years," Kira said, amazed at how much had changed. "And you've done well. The Velens are thriving. The collective is strong. Even the Council is starting to adapt." He took a sip of his drink. "You should be proud." "I'm grateful," Kira said. "Humanity saved my people." "We helped," David corrected. "But you did the hard work of rebuilding. You made the tough choices. You found the strength to keep going when everything seemed hopeless. Only because you showed us it was possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching ships come and go from the station. Human vessels mixed with Velen and Keth and Yorlin and a dozen other species. Everyone working together, trading, talking, living. "Can I ask you something?" Kira said. "Why are humans really like this? I've heard all the explanations about pack bonding and survival instincts, but there has to be more to it." David thought about it for a long time. "You know what I think it is? Humans have always been small. Even when we thought we were alone in the universe, we knew we were tiny compared to the cosmos. And being small in a big, dangerous universe teaches you something important." "What's that?" "That we're stronger together than apart. That helping your neighbor isn't just nice, it's survival. That the only way to face the darkness is to light it up with every candle you have." He looked at her. "When we found out we weren't alone in the universe, that there were thousands of other species out there, we didn't see threats or opportunities. We saw other people who might need help someday, other people who might help us when we need it." "The Council sees resources and security threats," Kira said. "The Council is afraid," David said. "We're not. Or maybe we are, but we do it anyway." He raised his glass. "To doing scary things because they're right, to helping strangers become friends, to building the galaxy we want to live in, instead of accepting the one we were given." Kira raised her glass and drank. Around them, the bar filled with laughter and conversation in a dozen languages. Species that had been enemies under Council rule now shared tables and stories. It wasn't perfect. There were still disputes and misunderstandings, but there was also hope. And at the center of it all, impossible to miss, were humans. Laughing too loud, asking too many questions, offering help before it was requested, breaking rules and making new ones, being themselves in all their chaotic, caring, stubborn glory. Kira had learned many things from humanity over the past 3 years. She had learned that the galaxy's rules weren't universal laws, but choices that could be changed. She had learned that small acts of kindness could cascade into revolutionary changes. She had learned that sometimes the right thing to do was also the hardest thing to do. But most importantly, she had learned that even when the entire galaxy seems against you, even when death seems certain and hope seems foolish, there are people out there who will come running if you call. People who will risk everything for strangers. People who believe that everyone deserves a chance to survive and thrive. She had learned that humanity had her covered, and that was worth more than all the Council's protection ever had been. Years would pass. The Free Trade Collective would grow. The Council would adapt or fade. New challenges would arise. But Kira knew that through it all, humans would be there. Not because they had to be, not because they wanted power or resources or glory, but because that's who they were. And the galaxy, slowly but surely, was becoming a better place because of it. David finished his drink and stood. I should get back to Lucky Strike. We've got a supply run to the Drin colonies tomorrow. Apparently they're having trouble with their food processors and need replacement parts. Always another crisis, Kira said. Always someone who needs help, David corrected with a smile. And we're pretty good at helping. He paused at the door. You know, when we first heard about your situation, a lot of humans said we should stay out of it, that it wasn't our problem, that we just make enemies for no good reason. What changed their minds? Nothing. They were outvoted by everyone who said it was the right thing to do. And once we started, everyone wanted to help. That's the thing about humans. We can't help helping. He waved. Take care, Kira. And remember, if you ever need anything, you know where to find us. He left and Kira sat alone with her drink and her thoughts. Through the viewport, she watched Lucky Strike undock and accelerate away, heading for whatever crisis needed addressing next. More ships would follow. They always did. Because humanity had made a promise, not just to the Velans, but to anyone who needed them. Relax. Humanity has you covered. Even when the galaxy is against you, even when hope seems lost, even when the rules say you should give up and accept your fate, humans would come. They would help. They would stay until the job was done, and then they would find someone else who needed them. That was their nature, and the galaxy, whether it liked it or not, was learning to be a little more like them every day. Kira finished her drink, paid her tab, and headed back to her own ship. She had meetings tomorrow with 3 new species interested in joining the collective. She had trade agreements to negotiate and disputes to mediate. She had work to do. But for tonight, she let herself feel grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful to have friends. Grateful to live in a galaxy where humans existed with all their impossible optimism and their unshakable belief that things could always be better. She smiled as her ship lifted off from Haven, watching the station recede behind her. Somewhere out there, David and his crew were already helping someone new. Somewhere else, Sarah was probably getting into trouble that would make a great story later. And across the sector, thousands of humans were doing what they did best, being themselves. The galaxy had been against the Valens once, but humanity had been there too. And that, Kira thought, had made all the difference.